The wind rustles through the standing stones, carrying faint echoes of chants from 1,000 years ago. Beneath the surface of every ancient kingdom's history lies a hidden layer, one woven not just with battles and kings, but with spells, omens, and rituals that shaped the fate of civilizations. Why did our ancestors embed magic so deeply into the foundations of power? What truths linger in the myths we've dismissed as mere stories? Today, we're pulling back the veil on prehistoric kingdoms to reveal how their beliefs in the supernatural didn't just explain the world, they controlled it. You'll discover how a shaman's prophecy could topple a dynasty, why sacred caves held the keys to political authority, and how the ghosts of these rituals still haunt our modern traditions. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a reckoning with the forces that quietly shaped human history. Deep in the flickering firelight of prehistoric camps, storytellers didn't just entertain, they shaped entire worldviews with their words. Picture this, a community huddled beneath a sky swirling with unnamed stars, listening as elders spun tales of how the mountains were formed by sleeping giants or why thunder was the voice of an angry god. These weren't whimsical fictions, they were the first textbooks, news broadcasts, and moral codes fused into one. Take the Aboriginal Dreamtime, where every rock and river pulsed with ancestral memory, binding people to the land through sacred obligation. Or the Norse, who saw their entire universe hanging from the branches of Yggdrasil, an immense tree connecting worlds. What's astonishing isn't just the creativity of these myths, but how they served as survival tools. When early humans painted bison on cave walls or aligned stone circles to the solstices, they weren't just decorating, they were hacking reality. These stories taught navigation by the stars, predicted seasonal floods, and even preserved medicinal plant knowledge through allegory. The same impulse that led Polynesian sailors to navigate by constellation myths also drove Egyptian priests to chart the Nile's floods with temple rituals. And here's the twist, modern lab experiments show our brains still process mythological imagery faster than factual data, as if those ancient neural pathways never fully closed. So when we scoff at primitive tales, we're overlooking something profound. They were humanity's first augmented reality, layering meaning onto a chaotic world in ways that still whisper to us today. From the first light of dawn at Göbekli Tepe to the torchlit coronations of forgotten kings, rituals acted as the invisible thread stitching societies together. Think of them as prehistoric social contract ceremonies where the divine and the earthly shook hands. When hunter-gatherers gathered around those intricately carved pillars, they weren't just worshipping, they were participating in humanity's first team-building exercise. Shared or forged shared purpose, a harvest festival wasn't simply about giving thanks, it synchronized entire communities to the rhythm of the seasons, ensuring collective survival. Even initiation rites, with their trials and sacred teachings, transformed individuals into living components of a greater organism. But here's where it gets fascinating. As villages grew into kingdoms, those binding ceremonies took on a darker, more calculated role. The same rituals that once united tribes became tools for kings and shamans to wield authority. Take the ancient Mesopotamian New Year festival, where the ruler would reenact the god Marduk's victory over chaos, a not-so-subtle reminder that rebellion meant cosmic disorder. Or consider how Egyptian pharaohs staged elaborate Opet festivals, parading statues of gods through cheering crowds, reinforcing the idea that their rule was divinely ordained. The genius of these spectacles, they turned obedience into devotion. What's chilling is how modern this ancient playbook feels. Today's political rallies, national holidays, even viral social media challenges echo those same primal impulses to belong, to believe, to be part of something larger than ourselves. The mediums have changed, but the spell remains unbroken. Long before kings sat on thrones and scribes recorded history, shamans walked between worlds, part healers, part visionaries, orchestrators of humanity's earliest dialogues with the unseen. In the flickering glow of cave fires, they donned antlered headdresses and cloaks of wolf pelts, their bodies painted with symbols we still struggle to decipher. These were no mere mystics, they were pioneers of the mind, experimenting with nature's psychoactive pharmacy. Siberian shamans brewed fly agaric tea, Amazonian elders drank ayahuasca, and the Iceman Ötzi carried pouchfuls of polypore mushrooms, their medicinal properties confirmed by modern science. What's striking isn't just their techniques, but their dual role as proto-scientists and mythmakers. When a shaman described climbing the world tree to bargain with spirits, they weren't only spinning tales, they were mapping altered states of consciousness onto the cosmos. The hallucinatory vines of the Amazon became serpent gods. The rhythmic drumming of Siberian rituals mimicked the heartbeat of the earth. These visions didn't just explain the unknown, they shaped laws, justified alliances, even predicted ecological shifts. A shaman's dream of a dying caribou herd could redirect an entire migration, yet their greatest power lay in transformation. Through sacred theater, chanting, dancing, costumed theatrics, they turned fear into ritual, chaos into order. The same neurological wiring that made ancient humans see faces in the clouds also made them trust the shaman's pantomime of wrestling invisible demons. And here's the haunting part, traces of their methods survive in modern religion, therapy, even politics. When a leader sways crowds with symbolic gestures or doctors use placebos, they're tapping into the same primal currents first harnessed by those early seers. The mushrooms and animal bones are gone, but the human need for meaning remains unchanged across millennia. The real mystery, how much deeper their knowledge ran. Modern researchers are just beginning to decode the acoustics of Paleolithic caves, where echoes amplified chants into supernatural experiences, or the precise botanical cocktails that could induce healing trances. What secrets evaporated when the last unbroken shamanic lineages faded? Perhaps the answer lingers in the way our brains still light up at campfire stories, forever hungry for the magic those first knowledge keepers conjured from the dark. Among the flickering torchlight of ancient caves, animals weren't just prey or predators. They were messengers, teachers, even ancestors. The aurochs painted on Lascaux' walls, the leopards guarding Çatalhöyük's shrines, these weren't random decorations. They were chapters in a forgotten language where every claw, horn, and feather carried meaning. Early humans didn't just observe the natural world, they spoke to it, and it spoke back in symbols we're only beginning to decode. Take the serpent, woven into creation myths from the Amazon to Mesopotamia. Its ability to shed skin made it a living metaphor for rebirth, knowledge so vital it was etched into temple walls and whispered in initiation rites. Or the raven, trickster and shape-shifter in indigenous traditions, embodying the unpredictable chaos of nature itself. These weren't just stories, they were survival manuals in disguise. A hunter who revered the wolf might internalize its pack tactics. A tribe that honored the salmon would learn to read river currents by tracking its migrations. What's startling is how these symbols transcended geography. The lion as a symbol of power appears in African cave art, Mesopotamian seals, and European heraldry, not because cultures copied one another, but because certain truths revealed themselves universally. A Bronze Age farmer and an Inuit shaman might never meet, yet both understood the bear as a bridge between earth and spirit. Modern psychology calls this archetypes, but our ancestors knew it as something deeper, a shared vocabulary of survival encoded in the wild. The secret isn't just in which animals were Chinese letter ed, but how they were depicted. The exaggerated antlers of Lascaux' stag didn't celebrate size, they signaled strength through endurance, a lesson for lean winters. Egypt's falcon-headed Horus wasn't just a sky god. His piercing gaze taught the precision of a hunter. Even today, when we speak of someone having eagle-eyed focus or being stubborn as a mule, we're accidentally quoting this ancient lexicon. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't why these symbols existed, but why we ever stopped listening to them. In a world of concrete and screens, we've lost the thread of that primal dialogue. Yet the symbols linger hidden in heraldic coats of arms, whispered in children's fables, even surfacing in dreams. They remind us that long before algorithms dictated our choices, the natural world was our first and wisest guide. Standing stones rise from the earth like frozen giants, their shadows tracing secret equations across the grass. These aren't random arrangements, they're ancient blueprints of the sky itself. At Newgrange in Ireland, a narrow passage lights up like a laser beam at winter solstice sunrise, flooding the inner chamber with golden light for exactly 17 minutes. In Orkney, the stones of Stenness frame the moon's most extreme northern rise, a celestial event that only happens every 18.5 years. The builders didn't just notice these patterns, they etched them into the landscape with backbreaking precision. What's staggering is the scale of their commitment. Stonehenge's bluestones were hauled 250 kilometers from Wales, equivalent to dragging a fleet of SUVs across mountains and rivers using nothing but ropes and sweat. This wasn't just architecture, it was obsession. Modern engineers using Neolithic tools took 3 weeks to move a single 1-ton stone half a mile. Multiply that by Stonehenge's 82 megaliths and you're looking at lifetimes of labor. Why would entire generations sacrifice themselves to stack rocks in specific formations? The answer might lie in the very fabric of their reality. To these builders, the heavens weren't distant lights. They were a living calendar, a divine clockwork governing floods, harvests, migrations. A solstice alignment wasn't symbolic, it was survival. When the Pleiades cluster appeared over Mesoamerican pyramids, it signaled planting season. When moonlight struck Karnak's menhirs at a precise angle, it might have warned of coming storms. The stones didn't just mark time, they conversed with it. Here's the twist, some alignments are so precise they defy easy explanation. The Great Pyramid's shafts point directly to Orion's belt and Sirius stars central to Egyptian afterlife beliefs. But here's the catch. Due to Earth's wobble, those alignments were only perfect for a narrow window around 2500 BCE. Either the builders got impossibly lucky, or their astronomical knowledge ran deeper than we've dared to assume. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't how they built these monuments, but why we've underestimated them for so long. When Victorian archaeologists dismissed stone circles as primitive altars, they missed the genius in the geometry. Those who raised these stones weren't superstitious savages, they were the Einsteins of their age, turning myths into mathematics, weaving eternity into rock. And every time a modern astronomer deciphers another alignment, we're not just solving an ancient puzzle, we're rediscovering a lost dialogue between earth and sky. The Divine King Paradox, how rulers became gods. It starts with a whisper, then a shout. The same chant echoing through palace halls and sun-baked temples. This king is no mere man. In the dust of ancient Ur, rulers inscribed their names alongside gods, insisting their blood carried divine fire. Egyptian pharaohs didn't just claim ancestry from deities, they became them at death, their pyramids serving as stairways to the stars. But here's the chilling truth behind the gold and grandeur. This wasn't just about devotion. It was the ultimate political strategy, etched in stone and sealed with human sacrifice. Take Gilgamesh, part hero, part tyrant, two-thirds god. His epic doesn't just blur the line between mortal and divine, it erases it entirely, teaching subjects that challenging a king meant defying the cosmos itself. Meanwhile, along the Nile, pharaohs staged elaborate coronations where priests draped them in lion pelts and falcon wings, transforming a man into the living incarnation of Horus. The message, obedience, wasn't optional, it was holy, but the cracks in this celestial facade appear in the shadows. Open any royal tomb, and you'll find more than treasure. You'll find servants, soldiers, even children buried alive to serve their master in the afterlife. At Ur's great death pit, 64 souls followed Queen Puabi into eternity, their skeletons still adorned with gold. Was this faith or fear wearing sacred robes? The darkest irony, many rulers may have believed their own myths. Power doesn't just corrupt, it transforms. When entire civilizations prostrate themselves before you, when priests declare your whims to be divine will, how could you not start seeing yourself as something more than human? This was the birth of theocracy, not as some abstract ideal, but as a weapon, a way to turn rebellions into blasphemy and dissent into heresy. Yet traces of this ancient playbook linger today. From the divine right of medieval kings to the cults of modern dictators, the recipe remains eerily familiar. Mix absolute power with sacred symbolism and let time do the rest. The bones in those tombs whisper a warning. When leaders claim heaven's endorsement, someone always pays the price in blood. So were these god kings cynical manipulators or true believers? Perhaps the answer lies in what they built, not just palaces, but entire cosmologies where their rule was as inevitable as the sunrise. And that might be the most terrifying magic trick of all, convincing a civilization or even yourself that power isn't taken. It's ordained. A cold wind stirs the peat bogs of northern Europe, where the earth has guarded its secrets in leathery skin and coiled rope. Toland man lies peaceful in death, his face so perfectly preserved you could mistake him for sleeping except for the noose still tight around his neck. This wasn't murder, it was ceremony. Across continents and centuries, from Aztec temples slick with blood to Celtic pits filled with shattered swords, humanity offered its most precious currency to the gods, life itself. What's chilling isn't just the violence, but the reverence surrounding it. The Incas selected children as Capacocha sacrifices, honored, fed like royalty, then left to freeze on Andean peaks as messengers to the gods. Their bodies, found centuries later with elaborate grave goods, show no signs of struggle. These weren't victims dragged screaming to altars, they were willing participants in a cosmic bargain. The logic was mercilessly practical. If a single life could secure rain for crops or victory in battle, wasn't the math undeniable? Yet the darkest rituals often held layered meanings. When Vikings strung up animals and occasionally humans in sacred groves, they weren't just appeasing Odin. The act mirrored the god's own sacrifice of himself to himself, a paradox where violence became sacred wisdom. Even the Aztecs, whose temples ran red with thousands of hearts, saw their victims not as slaughtered but transformed human bodies, becoming divine vessels in a cycle of celestial renewal. Modern science offers haunting clarity. Isotope analysis of bog bodies reveals many were fed special diets before death, some even hallucinogenic herbs. These weren't random executions but meticulously staged transitions between worlds. The same neurological wiring that makes soldiers throw themselves on grenades for comrades may explain why ancient volunteers walked calmly to altars. Both acts wired into our brains as extreme expressions of belonging. The true horror lies in how ordinary these sacrifices once were. Roman historians wrote casually of druids burning wicker men full of prisoners, while Egyptian texts matter-of-factly describe drowning maidens in the Nile to ensure its annual flood. What changed wasn't human nature, but our tolerance for the price. Today, we sacrifice time instead of lives, money instead of blood, but the underlying impulse remains, to trade something precious for protection from the unknown. Perhaps Toland man's greatest lesson isn't about cruelty, but about fear, and the lengths will go to tame it. His preserved face seems almost serene, as if death were just another doorway. And in that quiet submission, we glimpse the terrifying power of belief, the ability to make the unthinkable seem not just acceptable but holy. Beneath the flickering torchlight of ancient caves, something stirs in the shadows, not quite serpent, not quite eagle, but something impossibly in between. Across continents and centuries, cultures who'd never met somehow dreamed the same impossible creatures. Dragons coiling through Chinese rivers, griffins perched on Greek vases, feathered serpents soaring over Mesoamerican pyramids. These weren't just flights of fancy, they were humanity's first attempt to make sense of a world teeming with invisible dangers. Take the Mesopotamian Mus***2, Bus***U, its body a patchwork of lion, serpent, and eagle parts. This chimera wasn't merely decorative, it was a living warning label. The lion's strength symbolized earthly power. The serpent's coils whispered of subterranean rivers that could flood without warning, while the eagle's wings hinted at sudden destruction from above. Together, they embodied nature's uncontrollable fury, a reminder that even kings bowed to greater forces. Halfway across the world, Chinese emperors wore dragon motifs not as decorations, but as meteorological badges of office, believing their virtue could literally steer storms away from crops. What's fascinating is how these beasts mapped onto real-world threats. Griffins, with their lion's body and eagle's head, first appeared in Scythian gold mines, likely inspired by Protoceratops fossils eroding from the Gobi Desert. To steppe nomads, these half-bird, half-beast skeletons became guardians of distant treasures, warning trespassers away from perilous journeys. Even the fire-breathing dragon might trace its origins to early encounters with cobras, their hoods flaring like flames, venom burning through veins. Yet the deepest magic lies in their persistence. Today, when Game of Thrones dragons ignite our imaginations or corporate logos borrow griffins to symbolize vigilance, we're not just recycling old myths, we're tapping into neural wiring forged when humans first faced lightning, predators, and plagues with nothing but stories as armor. Modern brain scans reveal something startling. When we hear about monsters, our amygdala, the fear center, lights up faster than when processing factual threats. Those ancient storytellers weren't just entertaining, they were hardwiring survival lessons into our very biology. Perhaps these creatures endure because they're more than relics, they're mirrors. Every culture's monsters reflect their unique anxieties. European dragons hoard gold in mountain caves, echoing Viking fears of bandits and harsh winters. The Aztecs' feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl didn't breathe fire but brought maize and civilization, embodying the delicate balance between creation and destruction. Even now, the metaphors hold. Financial crises are dragons, pandemics, invisible monsters. The faces change, but the fears remain rooted in the same primordial soil. There's a reason these beasts still lurk at the edges of our imagination. They're the original teachers, reminding us that some truths are too vast, too terrifying to be spoken plainly. So we dress them in scales and wings, letting them carry the weight of the unknown. And when we dream them anew in books or screens, we're not escaping reality. We're continuing the oldest conversation our species ever had. How to live in a world where the line between myth and survival was never really there to begin with. Beneath the weight of time, buried in the ashes of ancient hearths and hidden in the shadows of temple walls, lies a story we've only begun to uncover. The story of women who didn't just participate in sacred rites but commanded them. At Çatalhöyük, one of humanity's first cities, clay figurines of full-bodied women were cradled in the walls of homes, their curves echoing the abundance of the earth itself. These weren't idle decorations, they were conduits to the divine, remnants of a time when creation and destruction were held in the palms of goddesses, not gods. Take the Venus of Willendorf, carved 25,000 years ago. her generous form a deliberate celebration of life's origins. She lacks facial features, as if her power wasn't tied to individuality but to something universal, the force that turns seeds into harvests and blood into new generations. Contrast her with later mythologies where goddesses were gradually recast as wives, mothers, or monsters. Athena, once a primal force of wisdom, became Zeus's daughter. The Sumerian Tiamat, a primordial creator, was rewritten as a chaos dragon slain by a male hero. The pattern is too consistent to ignore sacred narratives rewritten to reflect a new world order. But the evidence refuses to stay buried. In Minoan Crete, frescoes show priestesses presiding over ceremonies with serpents coiled around their arms, their authority unquestioned. The Oracle of Delphi, though operating in a patriarchal Greek world, held such sway that kings and generals knelt before her visions. Even in cultures where male gods dominated, women often kept the keys to the supernatural, like the Vestal Virgins of Rome, whose sacred fire was the literal heartbeat of the empire. Their power wasn't incidental, it was the last echo of an older truth. What's striking are the subtle rebellions preserved in art and myth. In Egypt, Hathor was never fully dethroned. She remained both nurturer and destroyer, her golden sistrum shaking away chaos. In India, Kali's wild, dark form defied domestication. Her necklace of skulls, a reminder that creation and annihilation are two sides of the same force. These weren't just stories, they were resistance, refusing to let the feminine divine be erased entirely. The deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. The shift from goddesses to gods wasn't spiritual evolution, it was a slow, deliberate rewriting of power. Yet even now, when archaeologists unearth another figurine or decode another hymn, we're forced to confront how much was lost. And perhaps in those whispers from the past, we're also hearing a question. What might our world look like if those sacred narratives had never been buried at all? The air was thick with the scent of smoldering herbs as the shaman's drumbeat quickened, each strike syncing with the pulse of the gathered tribe. In this twilight between worlds, the boundaries of reality shimmered and dissolved, not through mere imagination, but through potent brews and rhythmic rituals that rewired perception itself. From the Amazon's ayahuasca ceremonies to the frenzied dances of Dionysian worshippers, our ancestors didn't just seek escape in altered states, they forged pathways to what they believed were deeper truths. Consider the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, where initiates drank a sacred potion likely laced with ergot, a fungus related to modern LSD. Participants emerged forever changed, swearing they'd glimpsed the secrets of life and death. This wasn't mere intoxication, it was a carefully engineered voyage into the subconscious, a ritualized unraveling of the mind's fabric. Similarly, in the Siberian tundra, shamans ingested fly agaric mushrooms, their vivid hallucinations interpreted as journeys to the spirit world. What's startling is how modern brain scans mirror these experiences. Psychedelics like psilocybin deactivate the default mode network, the brain's ego center, creating that same sensation of merging with something infinite that ancient seekers described. But the real revelation lies in the art left behind. The swirling red dots of Spain's El Castillo cave, the hybrid human-animal figures in South African rock shelters, these aren't random doodles. They're snapshots of the psychedelic experience itself, where geometric patterns and morphing entities appear universally across cultures. Even the famed Lascaux bison seem to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the artists were tracing visions flickering behind their eyelids. Modern researchers have dubbed this phenomenon neurotheology, the idea that hallucinogens might have hardwired humanity's sense of the sacred. Yet the most provocative question isn't whether these substances induced visions, but why they became sacred tools rather than recreational distractions. In the Amazon, ayahuasca is called the Vine of Souls, a teacher that reveals hidden illnesses both physical and spiritual. Contemporary studies now validate its antidepressant properties, suggesting ancient rituals were proto-medical procedures wrapped in myth. The Dionysian Maenads who danced themselves into ecstatic trances weren't just revelers. Their frenzies were communal resets, dissolving social hierarchies in shared transcendence. Perhaps what we're witnessing isn't just ancient drug use, but the birth of human curiosity itself. Those early explorers of inner space were mapping territories we're only now beginning to study with fMRI machines and clinical trials. Their divine madness might have been the first experiments in consciousness expansion, a dialogue between biology and belief that still echoes in every church pew, therapy session, or festival crowd swaying to rhythmic beats. The trance states we now dissect in labs were, for them, the very language of the gods. The passage into death was never a final curtain. It was a doorway carefully crafted and ceremoniously crossed. Picture a Neolithic family lowering their loved one into a tomb at Brú na Bóinne, the body curled like a seed waiting to sprout, dusted in vibrant red ochre as if to preserve the warmth of life itself. This wasn't mere burial, it was an act of faith in renewal. Across continents, from the Egyptian deserts to the river valleys of China, cultures wove the same promise into their rituals, that decay was merely the prelude to rebirth. Take Osiris, the god whose dismembered body was pieced back together by Isis, only to rise as lord of the underworld. His myth wasn't just a story, it mirrored the Nile's annual flood, where barren land awoke to fertility. Farmers who saw their fields die and resurrect with the seasons could look at Osiris and think, if the earth can return, why not us? The same logic pulsed through Celtic Samhain festivals, where bonfires blazed to guide souls back to the living, blurring the line between ancestors and descendants. But here's where ritual crossed into politics, when a king's tomb was aligned to catch the first light of the winter solstice. As in Newgrange's precision-engineered passage, it wasn't just poetry. It was propaganda. The message royal bloodlines didn't end, they cycled like the stars. Stonehenge's heel stone framing the midsummer sunrise, China's terracotta army guarding an emperor's journey to the afterlife. These were more than monuments. They were contracts written in stone, binding the living to the dead in an unbroken chain of power. The genius of these narratives lay in their duality. They comforted the grieving with visions of reunion while giving rulers a divine mandate. You don't serve a king, you serve the cosmos. Modern excavations reveal the pragmatism beneath the pageantry. DNA from Siberian burials shows sacrificed attendants were often relatives, their deaths ensuring dynasties stayed intact beyond the grave. Even the placement of grave goods, tools, weapons, ceremonial masks hinted at a society's fears. A warrior buried with his sword might reflect anxiety about chaos in the afterlife. A child interred with toys spoke to the universal ache of lost potential. What's haunting is how little has changed. Today's cemeteries still face east for resurrection symbolism, and space burials literalize the ancient wish to join the stars. The tools have modernized, but the longing remains to believe that the last heartbeat is just a pause, not an end. Those Neolithic builders aligning tombs with celestial events weren't primitive dreamers. They were architects of hope, turning humanity's oldest terror into the foundation of civilizations. And in their silent stones, a question lingers. If we no longer build temples to the cycle of rebirth, what have we replaced it with? Etched into canyon walls and hidden beneath lichen-covered boulders, ancient symbols whisper secrets in a language we've forgotten how to hear. A handprint pressed into red ochre at a cave in Argentina mirrors another found in Indonesia, separated by oceans, yet united by some unspoken understanding. The spiral carved into a Newgrange stone isn't just decoration. It's a puzzle spinning across millennia, appearing in Navajo sand paintings, Minoan pottery, and even the tattoos of Siberian shamans. What if these weren't random markings, but fragments of humanity's first universal language? Take the cup and ring marks scattered from Scotland to India, shallow depressions surrounded by concentric circles. To modern eyes, they might look like primitive doodles, but their precision tells another story. Some align with solstice sunlight, transforming stone into solar calendars. Others cluster near water sources, as if mapping hidden springs. The most tantalizing theory, they could be spiritual portals where rituals allowed communication between worlds. Indigenous oral traditions from Australia to the Americas describe similar symbols as pathways for ancestral spirits, suggesting our ancestors didn't just see rocks, but interactive canvases pulsing with meaning. What's astonishing is how these symbols evolved. The zigzag, one of humanity's oldest motifs, might have begun as a simple representation of water, later morphing into lightning bolts in Egyptian hieroglyphs or the serpentine patterns of Celtic knots. Even the humble dot, repeated across global petroglyphs, could signify stars, seeds, or souls depending on context. Unlike modern alphabets locked to specific sounds, these symbols were fluid, carrying layers of meaning like Russian nesting dolls. A spiral might symbolize the sun's journey one day and the cycle of rebirth the next. The real breakthrough came when researchers noticed patterns transcending geography. The Triskelion 3 interlocked spirals appears in Bronze Age Malta, on Mycenaean shields, and in Hopi clan signs. Coincidence? Unlikely. Cognitive scientists suggest such shapes resonate because they mirror natural phenomena, whirlpools, fern fronds, galaxies, hardwiring them into our collective subconscious. This isn't just art, it's humanity's first attempt to name the unnamed, to pin down the shimmering mysteries of existence in stone. But the most haunting question remains: what stories have we lost? When 19th century scholars dismissed petroglyphs as primitive art, they silenced voices that once carried entire cosmologies. Now, as laser scans reveal previously invisible carvings and AI cross-references global symbol databases, we're finally learning to listen. Each rediscovered motif is like finding a single page from a scattered epic, one that might rewrite everything we thought we knew about how our ancestors saw the world and their place in it. Celestial myths, the sky as humanity's first story book. A single star blinks above the silent desert, its light unchanged since the day a Babylonian priest first etched its movement onto a clay tablet. Across oceans and eras, civilizations who never shared a word looked up and saw the same cosmic patterns, not just as lights in the void, but as characters in an epic written across the night. Orion's belt wasn't merely 3 stars to the ancient Maya, it was the girdle of the maize god, whose death and rebirth mirrored the agricultural cycle. The Pleiades cluster didn't just twinkle, it signaled to Polynesian voyagers when to launch canoes and told Greek farmers when to sow crops. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was precision astronomy wrapped in metaphor, a survival manual written in starlight. The real magic lies in how these celestial stories shaped reality on the ground. At Chichen Itza, the serpent shadow slithering down El Castillo's steps during equinoxes wasn't just a light show. It was a public demonstration of the king's divine connection to Kukulkan, the feathered sky serpent. Similarly, Egypt's Great Pyramid doesn't just point north. Its air shafts align with Thuban, the pole star of 2500 BC, and Orion's belt, mirroring Osiris' celestial throne. Every alignment served a dual purpose: practical calendaring and political theater, proving rulers didn't just track the heavens, they claimed kinship with them. Archaeoastronomy has uncovered eerie similarities between distant cultures. Both the Pueblones of Choco Canyon and England's Neolithic builders marked the 18.5-year lunar standstill cycle, a complex astronomical event invisible to casual observers. How did Stone Age cultures from opposite sides of the globe detect this pattern? The answer might lie in the longevity of oral tradition. when a shaman told of a moon that hesitated at the same mountain peak every 19 winters. That observation could survive centuries, hardening into myth until someone carved it into stone. Yet somewhere along the way, we fractured this unified vision. Modern science dismissed the stories as folklore, forgetting they encoded real data. The Dogon people of Mali, for instance, knew of Sirius' invisible companion star long before telescopes confirmed its existence, knowledge preserved through generations of ritual. When Greek astronomers like Ptolemy separated planetary motion from mythology, they gained mathematical precision but lost the narrative that made the sky meaningful beyond equations. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't that these myths faded, but that we stopped listening to what they tried to teach us. Indigenous star lore often contains ecological warnings like the Maori tale of Ranganui, the Sky Father weeping dew when separated from Earth Mother Papatuanuku, a poetic lesson about deforestation's consequences. Today, as light pollution erases the stars for millions, we're not just losing beauty, we're severing a thread that once connected every human culture to the cosmos and to each other. When the waters rose, how ancient flood myths might hold a grain of truth beneath the familiar story of Noah's Ark and Gilgamesh's great deluge lies something more than myth, something etched in the very geology of our planet. From the highlands of Mesoamerica to the valleys of Mesopotamia, nearly every ancient culture preserved a version of the same terrifying tale, a catastrophic flood that wiped the slate clean, leaving only a handful of survivors to rebuild. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as imaginative allegories until scientists started finding evidence of real-world disasters that matched the descriptions with eerie precision. Take the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. Around 5600 BCE, rising global temperatures melted glaciers, causing the Mediterranean to breach a natural dam near modern-day Istanbul. Within months, an inland freshwater lake transformed into the saltwater Black Sea, swallowing settlements along its shores. The scale of destruction would have been apocalyptic for Neolithic farmers, entire villages submerged, generations of knowledge lost beneath the waves. Could this be the kernel of truth behind flood myths that spread across Europe and Asia? The timing aligns strikingly with the earliest written accounts, like the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, where the gods let loose the deluge upon humanity. But here's where it gets even more compelling. Similar flood legends emerge in places far removed from the Black Sea. The Hopi speak of a world purified by water, while Aboriginal stories describe ancestral heroes fleeing rising tides in canoes. Even in the Amazon, indigenous myths tell of a great serpent whose thrashing tail caused rivers to overflow. What connects these disparate tales isn't necessarily a single event, but a shared trauma, a collective memory of coastal inundations, glacial melt, or river valleys transformed overnight. The genius of these myths lies in their dual purpose. They weren't just records of disaster, they were survival manuals wrapped in narrative. The Babylonian flood story includes detailed instructions for building a circular ark, a design modern engineers confirm would withstand turbulent waters better than a rectangular ship. Likewise, the Filipino legend of Lumawig doesn't just describe a flood. It teaches which mountain peaks remain safe when lowlands vanish beneath the waves. These weren't bedtime stories, they were ancestral Wikipedia, encoding life-saving knowledge in memorable form. What's haunting is how these ancient warnings resonate today. As sea levels creep upward and extreme weather rewrites coastlines, the line between myth and prophecy blurs. Our ancestors memorialized floods not just as punishments, but as reminders. Civilizations thrive or collapse by their relationship with water. The silt layers they left behind, whether in Mesopotamian ruins or Andean sediment cores, are more than geological records. They're mirrors reflecting our own vulnerability to the next great deluge. Perhaps the most profound question isn't whether these floods happened, but why we stopped listening to the lessons they carried. When we dismiss myths as mere fiction, we risk forgetting that they're often history's oldest teachers, written not in ink, but in the indelible language of survival. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a Neolithic cave, a shaman grinds herbs into a paste, carefully documenting which mixtures ease pain and which bring fever, not realizing they're laying the foundations of pharmacology. What we now dismiss as primitive magic was often humanity's first foray into trial and error experimentation, a bridge between the unknown and the understood. Those early healers tracking lunar cycles to time herbal harvests weren't just practicing superstition. They were pioneering the scientific method millennia before laboratories existed. Take metallurgy, one of humanity's most transformative discoveries. The first metalsmiths likely viewed their craft as sacred alchemy, chanting spells as they extracted copper from malachite. Yet their furnaces, temperatures meticulously controlled by clay bellows and airflow, operated on principles any modern engineer would recognize. The legendary swords that never dulled of Damascus weren't magical. They were nano-engineered with carbon nanotubes, the result of centuries of empirical refinement passed down through ritualistic guilds. Even something as seemingly irrational as astrology birthed rigorous celestial tracking. Babylonian priests recording planetary motions created the first mathematical models of the cosmos. The placebo and nocebo effects reveal how deeply belief intertwines with biology. A curse tablet buried under a rival's doorstep might seem like mere superstition, but modern medicine confirms that extreme psychological distress can trigger fatal conditions like Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, literally a broken heart. When Aztec shamans cursed enemies with wasting sickness, they may have been weaponizing stress hormones long before scientists identified cortisol. Perhaps most fascinating is how these sacred experiments shaped entire disciplines. Egyptian embalmers mastering antiseptic resins laid groundwork for modern surgery. Chinese alchemists seeking immortality instead discovered gunpowder. Every time an ancient healer noted that willow bark eased pain, later refined into aspirin, or a midwife used ergot fungi to induce labor, the basis of modern oxytocin, they were contributing to a body of knowledge that only later shed its mystical skin. The real question isn't why our ancestors cloaked science in magic. It's why we've been so quick to dismiss their insights because of the robes they wore. In an age without microscopes or textbooks, ritual was the framework that preserved observations across generations. Those haunting cave paintings of hybrid animal-human figures. They might be early attempts to document genetic mutations or psychedelic visions, both subjects of cutting-edge research today. The boundary between magic and science was never a line, but a winding river carrying knowledge forward in ways we're only beginning to map. The air is thick with the scent of ripe fruit as the storyteller begins his audience leaning in, as he describes a time when rivers flowed with honey and trees bent low with ready harvest. From Mesopotamia's Dilmun to the Greek Arcadia, every ancient civilization seems to whisper of a vanished golden age, a paradise lost to time. But what if these wistful tales weren't just escapist fantasies? Hidden beneath the imagery of eternal springs and effortless abundance lies something far more strategic, a cultural blueprint for control. Consider the Mesopotamian myth of Adapa, who missed immortality because he refused the gods' food, a parable explaining why humans must toil under the sun. The biblical Eden follows the same pattern, framing labor as divine punishment for disobedience. Even Plato's Atlantis, often romanticized as an advanced utopia, was originally described as a cautionary tale of pride before the fall. These stories didn't just memorialize some idyllic past, they functioned like societal operating systems. By contrasting an imagined era of ease with the hardships of the present, rulers could frame inequality as inevitable, even righteous. Beneath the surface, these myths often carried geological truths. The Aboriginal Dreamtime's flooded landscapes align with post-Ice Age sea level rises, while Cherokee legends of a world before fire may reflect memories of volcanic winters. When societies transition from hunting-gathering to agriculture, a shift marked by backbreaking labor and famine risks, the Golden Age narrative softened the blow. Suddenly, scarcity wasn't a failure of governance but the natural order, a consequence of humanity's mythical fall. The psychological genius of these myths becomes clear when you trace their impact. Hesiod's works and days divided history into declining eras: gold, silver, bronze, iron, each worse than the last. This framework made social hierarchies seem predestined, not constructed. Why rebel against kings or priests if their authority was ordained by cosmic decline? Even the layout of Sumerian cities reinforced the message, with ziggurats symbolizing the lost connection between heaven and earth. Yet the most provocative twist comes from modern neuroscience. Studies show nostalgia literally rewires pain perception, easing present suffering by invoking comforting memories, even fabricated ones. Ancient leaders may have stumbled onto this truth instinctively, using Golden Age myths as collective anesthesia for societal strain. Today's political slogans promising to restore greatness or return to tradition are just the latest iteration of this primal tool. What makes these stories endure isn't their poetry, but their utility. They're neither holy lies nor literal history, but something in between, psychological scaffolding that allowed civilizations to bear the weight of progress. The next time you hear a tale of a forgotten utopia, ask not whether it existed, ask what purpose its longing serves, because the most powerful myths aren't about the past at all. They're scripts for the future, written in the ink of collective desire. The battlefield falls eerily silent as the Celtic warrior strips off his armor, his naked body painted in swirling blue woad under the pale dawn light. To his enemies, this seems like madness, but to him, it's divine strategy. Across time and continents, war was never just about force. It was a sacred theater where bloodshed became communion and violence a form of prayer. Take the Aztec Xochitl, or Flower Wars, staged battles where the goal wasn't conquest but capturing prisoners for sacrifice. These weren't mere skirmishes, they were deeply choreographed rituals ensuring a steady flow of offerings to nourish the gods. Imagine the paradox: warriors fighting not to kill but to preserve their foes for a higher purpose. Even the weapons were blunt-edged to avoid fatal wounds. Here, combat wasn't just tactical, it was the beating heart of cosmic balance where spilled blood fed the sun itself. Meanwhile, in the frozen north, Norse Ulfheidnar warriors draped themselves in wolf pelts, their minds alight with hallucinogenic brews of henbane and amanita mushrooms. Historical accounts describe them biting shields, howling like beasts, and fighting with inhuman strength, traits modern science attributes to adrenaline surges and altered pain perception. But to the Vikings, this wasn't chemistry, it was transformation. By channeling the spirit of the wolf, they became something more than human, their fury a gift from Odin. What's chilling isn't just the intensity of these rituals, but their psychological precision. The Celtic naked warrior wasn't just rejecting armor, he was weaponizing terror, using his vulnerability to signal supernatural invincibility. Roman historians wrote of these fighters as possessed, their very appearance sowing panic. Similarly, the Aztec Flower Wars ensured a perpetual enemy. Without conquest, the cycle of sacrifice could continue indefinitely. These weren't just traditions, they were systems honed over centuries to bind violence to belief. Yet the most haunting legacy lies in how these rituals normalized the unthinkable. When Norse sagas glorified warriors who felt no wounds, or Aztec glyphs depicted captives willingly climbing sacrifice pyramids, they weren't just telling stories, they were reshaping reality. If death in battle meant feasting in Valhalla or becoming the sun's sustainer, fear dissolved into honor. Modern militaries still grapple with this power. Basic training rituals, unit insignia, and even drone warfare euphemisms, surgical strikes, subtly echo the ancient impulse to sanctify killing. Perhaps the deepest question isn't why these rituals existed, but why they worked so well. Neurobiology offers clues. Repetitive chants, rhythmic drumming, and altered states can suppress the prefrontal cortex, quieting moral hesitation. But the truer magic lay in the stories. A warrior who believes the gods demand his violence isn't just following orders, he's fulfilling destiny. And that might be the most terrifying alchemy of all, the ability to turn slaughter into sacrament and soldiers into living offerings. Beneath the Earth's surface lies a hidden geography of fear and revelation where jagged limestone corridors and echoing chambers became humanity's first cathedrals. Picture a young initiate in Paleolithic Europe, crawling through narrow passages with only a flickering torch, the walls suddenly opening onto a gallery of painted bison that seemed to breathe in the unstable light. This wasn't just a cave, it was a threshold. From Tibet's sky burial caves to the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Teotihuacan, these subterranean spaces served as physical portals to the imagined otherworld, places where the rules of ordinary life dissolved. The sheer audacity of prehistoric artists is staggering. At Chauvet, handprints and animal figures cluster in the deepest, most treacherous chambers, areas requiring ropes or climbing to access. Why risk life to paint where almost no one would see? The answer may lie in the cave's paradoxical nature. A womb and a tomb, a place of absolute darkness that somehow revealed visions. Sensory deprivation studies show that prolonged time in darkness triggers vivid hallucinations, geometric shapes, ghostly figures, even out-of-body sensations. For ancient peoples, these weren't neurological glitches, they were divine transmissions. The cave's silence amplified every drip of water into a spirit's whisper, every flicker of torchlight into dancing phantoms. Initiation rituals weaponized this psychological alchemy. Greek Eleusinian mysteries staged symbolic deaths in cave-like enclosures, while Maya youth endured trials in Belize Acton Tunishil Muknal, where skeletal remains still cling to crevices. Darkness wasn't just absence, it was raw material for transformation. Even Plato's famous allegory of the cave, where prisoners mistake shadows for reality, echoes a deeper truth. These spaces weren't just metaphors but active participants in reshaping consciousness. The universality of cave myths hints at something primal in human cognition. Aboriginal Australians speak of ancestral beings emerging from underground dream worlds, just as the Aztecs believed their ancestors arose from Chicamostoc's 7 caverns. Norse sagas describe dwarves forging destiny in subterranean forges. Caves distilled the paradox of creation, that life springs from darkness, order from chaos. Modern archaeology confirms their practical roles as shelters and water sources, but their symbolic power ran deeper. What's haunting is how these ancient intuitions resonate with modern science. Geologists now know caves preserve climate records in stalagmite layers, much like tree rings. Our ancestors unknowingly revered nature's archives, and perhaps there's wisdom in their reverence. In an age of artificial light, we've forgotten how darkness can clarify rather than obscure. The next time you stand at a cave's mouth, consider what its silence once meant. Not emptiness, but a canvas for the most profound human questions. Music and myth, the sonic architecture of belief. A bone flute carved from a vulture's wing hums to life in a cave 40,000 years ago. Its notes not just filling the air, but shaping it. This was no simple melody. To the player, those vibrations were threads in a grander tapestry, weaving together earth and sky, the living and the unseen. Across continents and millennia, music was never just sound. It was a bridge to the divine, a force as tangible as fire or flood in the hands of those who knew how to wield it. Take the bullroarer, a simple slat of wood whirled on a cord. In Aboriginal ceremonies, its eerie drone wasn't just atmospheric. It was the voice of ancestral spirits, summoning storms or guiding initiations. Similarly, Siberian shamans used frame drums to navigate trance states, their rhythmic pulses syncing with heartbeats to induce visions. Modern experiments in archaeoacoustics reveal something startling. Spaces like Malta's Hal Saflieni hypogeum weren't just burial chambers, they were resonating chambers. Chant certain tones in those limestone corridors, and the sound amplifies into an otherworldly hum, as if the walls themselves were singing. The genius of these sonic rituals wasn't just in their execution, but in their precision. Pythagoras' concept of the music of the spheres, the idea that planets moved in celestial harmony, wasn't just poetic metaphor. It echoed a far older intuition, that rhythm and pitch mirrored the hidden order of the cosmos. When Mayan priests blew conch shells to greet the dawn or Tibetan monks chanted at specific frequencies to shatter ignorance, they weren't performing. They were engineering reality, using sound waves to alter perception and emotion long before neuroscience explained how music triggers dopamine release. What's fascinating is how these practices converge with modern science. Studies show rhythmic drumming can shift brain waves into theta states, the same frequencies associated with deep meditation and creativity. The Aboriginal songlines, which encode navigation routes in melodies, demonstrate how acoustic memory outperforms rote memorization. Even today, soldiers march to cadences, churches swell with hymns, and protests rally behind chants, proof that sound's power to unite and transform remains undiminished. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether ancient cultures understood sound's effects, but how they mapped them without oscilloscopes or tuning forks. Did they stumble upon these truths through trial and error, or was there a deeper wisdom, lost to time, about vibration as the fabric of existence? When you hear an echo in a cavern or feel a bass note vibrate your ribs, you're touching the same primal force that once made rain fall, spirits speak, and shamans fly. And that's no metaphor, it's physics wearing the mask of myth. The fire crackles as an elder begins the tale, not with a king or warrior, but with an ordinary person suddenly thrust into the extraordinary. Whether it's Gilgamesh mourning his friend Enkidu, Hercules wrestling with his godly legacy, or Beowulf confronting Grendel's mother in her watery lair, these ancient stories pulse with the same heartbeat. Beneath their cultural differences lies a shared skeleton, one that predates written history and lingers in our modern myths, from Star Wars to The Lion King. This recurring pattern, the hero's journey, is more than just good storytelling. Anthropologists trace its roots to prehistoric rites of passage, where young initiates endured physical trials, symbolic deaths, and rebirths into adulthood. A Siberian boy surviving alone in the taiga, a Maasai warrior hunting his first lion, a Celtic youth spending a night in a burial mound. These weren't just tests of courage. They were live-action rehearsals of the monomyth, training individuals to navigate life's upheavals through a familiar narrative lens. What makes this template so enduring? Cognitive science offers clues. The hero's journey mirrors our brain's wiring for problem solving. A challenge arises, call to adventure, strategies are tested, trials, and lessons integrate return with boon. MRI studies show our neural activity spikes when hearing structured narratives versus random events, suggesting these arcs align with how we naturally process experience. Yet the hero's journey was never just personal. Societies weaponized its power. Amazonian shamans returning from vision quests became community healers. Arthurian knights fetching holy grails reinforced feudal loyalty. The boon brought back often served the tribe agricultural secrets, moral codes, even warnings. When Sumerian scribes etched Gilgamesh's failures onto clay tablets, they weren't just entertaining, they were sculpting cultural identity through shared metaphor. Today, we've swapped enchanted forests for boardrooms and magical guides for mentors, but the architecture remains. Video game levels mimic trial sequences, therapy frameworks echo the road back phase, and even scientific discovery follows the pattern. Think of Marie Curie's radioactive abyss yielding transformative knowledge. The hero's journey persists not because it's exotic, but because it's elemental. A mirror held up to humanity's oldest question: how do we grow through adversity? Perhaps its true magic lies in democratization. Unlike royal genealogies or divine edicts, this template whispers that transformation isn't reserved for gods or kings. The shepherd, the farmer, the overlooked younger sibling, all could be heroes in waiting, and that radical idea, coded into stories told across millennia, might be the most revolutionary spell our ancestors ever cast. Taboos and totems, the invisible laws of early societies, a single word, whispered with reverence tapu, could halt an entire village in its tracks. In the islands of Polynesia, this concept wasn't just a rule, it was an invisible fence woven into the fabric of reality. To touch a sacred object, hunt in forbidden groves, or even step into a chief's shadow meant risking more than disapproval. It meant inviting disaster not just for the offender, but for the whole community. What seems like superstition to modern eyes was, in fact, one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated social technologies. Long before courts and prisons, societies relied on sacred prohibitions to maintain balance. Dietary restrictions like the Jewish kosher laws or Hindu prohibitions against beef weren't just about taste, they were ecological strategies disguised as divine will. By declaring certain animals off-limits, communities prevented overhunting during vulnerable seasons. The Maori's Rahui system, for instance, temporarily forbade harvesting from forests or fisheries, allowing ecosystems to recover. Violators weren't merely punished by people, they were said to suffer curses, sickness, or even calamity from angered spirits. Kinship taboos functioned with similar precision. Australian Aboriginal communities developed intricate marriage rules, dividing clans into moieties to prevent inbreeding, all encoded in stories of ancestral beings who punished transgressors with chaos. The Inca's strict bans on royal sibling marriage, conversely, centralized power by keeping bloodlines pure. These weren't arbitrary edicts but survival mechanisms wrapped in myth. Even something as simple as menstrual taboos, found worldwide, likely originated to reduce conflict by segregating women during fertility cycles, minimizing competition among males. The brilliance of this system lay in its psychological leverage. Unlike human laws, which could be debated or resisted, taboos drew authority from the unseen. A Hawaiian commoner didn't steal a king's knot because gods watched, but because the act was kapu, charged with supernatural danger. Anthropologists call this costly signaling, when beliefs are so deeply ingrained that enforcing them requires no police, just collective dread. Modern experiments reveal something fascinating. People behave more honestly when told they're being watched by unseen eyes, even briefly flashing images of watching faces on screens. Our ancestors intuited this, turning the entire world into a panopticon of the sacred. Yet beneath the fear lay something subtler: trust. When everyone adhered to the same invisible boundaries, cooperation flourished. A Tlingit hunter in the Pacific Northwest could leave his canoe unattended, knowing no one would touch it under totem pole protections. Polynesian voyagers sharing scarce resources during migrations relied on tapu to ensure fairness. These weren't primitive restraints but the glue of civilization, binding strangers into communities long before contracts or kings. The haunting question isn't why these taboos existed, but why we ever convinced ourselves we outgrew them. Today's sacred might wear different masks, health fads treated as dogma, unspoken workplace norms, even viral social media shaming, but the underlying mechanism remains unchanged. We still navigate a world of invisible lines, still fear invisible consequences. The language has modernized, but the spell those first societies cast, that never really broke at all. The sky darkens without warning. Ancient scribes scratch frantic notes as daylight vanishes mid-morning. In the Forbidden City, astronomers kneel before trembling instruments, knowing a miscalculation could cost their heads. Across civilizations, celestial events like eclipses weren't just natural phenomena. They were existential crises for those who claimed divine authority. When the sun or moon vanished unexpectedly, it wasn't merely an astronomical event. It was a cosmic challenge to the very foundations of power. Chinese dynasties invested fortunes in stargazers, not for scientific curiosity but survival. The Shiji records how Emperor Zhongkang executed his royal astronomers in 2154 BC after they failed to predict an eclipse, viewing their oversight as treason against heaven's mandate. This wasn't cruelty, it was desperate theater. By blaming human error rather than celestial whims, rulers preserved the illusion that the universe operated on predictable, governable terms. Half a world away, Hittite kings faced similar peril. Tablets from Hattusa describe solar eclipses as the storm god Teshub turning his back, signaling divine displeasure. A darkened sun often sparked rebellions, forcing rulers to perform elaborate purification rites or even abdicate. The irony was exquisite. Leaders who claimed to mediate between gods and mortals suddenly scrambling to interpret a shadow's meaning. What made these moments so destabilizing was their unpredictability. Unlike comets or planetary alignments, which could be tracked and spun as omens, eclipses arrived with terrifying spontaneity. Assyrian annals describe the chaos when day turned to night, markets emptied, armies halted campaigns, and priests scrambled to appease enraged deities. Even the mighty Akkadian Empire may have collapsed partly due to a cluster of eclipses in 2200 BC, interpreted as the gods abandoning Sargon's dynasty. Modern astronomy reveals the deeper brilliance behind ancient panic. Solar eclipses follow the Saros cycle, a repeating pattern every 18 years, 11 days, but without precise record-keeping, they seemed random. Cultures like the Babylonians, who cracked this code, held immense power. Their eclipse tablets weren't just scientific achievements, they were geopolitical weapons, allowing rulers to predict divine will with staged precision. The true lesson lies in what happened after the light returned. Some kings doubled down on brutality, like the Inca Pachacuti, who allegedly sacrificed children following an eclipse to rebalance cosmic order. Others reinvented themselves. Egypt's Amarna period saw Akhenaten overhaul the entire pantheon after a solar event, replacing traditional gods with a single sun deity. Each response exposed the same truth. Civilizations would rather upheave their belief systems than admit their rulers lacked control. Today, we watch eclipses with wonder, not dread. Yet traces of that ancient anxiety linger in stock market dips during celestial events, or the way leaders still scramble to explain natural disasters. The sky hasn't changed, only our illusions of dominion over it have grown more sophisticated. And perhaps that's the most humbling eclipse of all, realizing how thin the line remains between reverence and regime change when the lights go out. As the embers of our exploration glow faint in the dark, one truth rises unmistakably from the ashes of time. Those ancient rituals and myths were never just stories told around fires. They were the very code that powered human civilization. The shamans' chant, the king's celestial alignment, the blood spilled on sacred stones, all were threads in a vast, invisible tapestry weaving together survival, power, and wonder. Consider how much we've underestimated these traditions. What we once dismissed as primitive superstition turns out to be a sophisticated toolkit, part calendar, part psychology, part social contract. The same neural wiring that made a Neolithic hunter see spirits in the wind now makes our hearts race at movie monsters or our hands clutch lucky charms before a job interview. The mediums have changed, but the magic remains. There's a quiet irony here. We pride ourselves on living in the age of reason, yet we're still chasing the same fundamental questions those early societies grappled with. How do we endure loss? What binds communities together? Where do we find meaning when the world feels untamed? Their answers, encoded in myth and stone, were no less nuanced than ours, just written in a different language. So the next time you walk past an old church built atop a pagan spring, or catch yourself knocking on wood, remember, you're not indulging in antiquated whimsy. You're touching the oldest part of being human, that stubborn, beautiful instinct to find patterns in chaos, to turn fear into ritual, and to keep building bridges between what we know and what we dream. If these echoes across millennia have stirred something in you, you're not alone. The conversation doesn't end here. Hit subscribe to keep unraveling history's hidden threads with us, and drop a comment below. Which ritual or symbol from our journey spoke to you most? Was it the astronomer kings, the cave painters, or perhaps the shape-shifting shamans? Your perspective adds another layer to this endless excavation of human wonder. Until next time, keep listening for the whispers in the